Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we're looking at Chapter 7 of Book 6, which again continues the discussion of installing oligarchy. Now, as we last chapter, which began the discussion of creating oligarchies, establishing, remember, establishing not only for a short time but for a long time, he discussed the varieties of democracy, oligarchy, right? And that remember that these were kind of companions or opposites of the variations of democratic regimes. So the subvarieties of oligarchies kind of matched in inverse character to that of the democracies, right? Um, Here we continue this discussion, right? Now, he says, he's going to talk about the parts of the city again. He's going to go back into this idea. Now, is it maybe there is this connection of the four and the four, right? Remember, we have this problem with the subvarieties of democracy. The four, we have the again the principal part, the multitude, and the multitude and the notables, right? This is going to be this discussion here. Here he starts, talking about this is a very interesting question about parts of the city again, the essential parts. Since there are four parts of the multitude, the laboring, the multitude, the farming, the working, the merchants, and the laboring, right? Remember that the herding is part of the farming, kind of connected in there. Remember, but now the working, which is the craftsmen, the merchants, tradesmen, and the laboring, right? And this seems to be a hierarchy, right? This seems the order from best to worst elements. And the four parts of the city that are useful with review to war. Now, this is again four parts of the multitude, four parts of the city that are useful to with war. Horse rearing, heavily armed. In other words, those who grow horses and train them. The heavily armed, those who are heavily armed, the light armed, and the seafaring element. Again, this seems to echo this, right? The ones who are doing this, the farming, the working craftsmen who are making, therefore they're craftsmen, they make heavily armed. The merchants who are lightly armed, it seems to be, and the laboring element, which seems to be the seafaring element, the ones, the rowers, right? The rowers. Um, Wherever it happens that the country is suitable for horses, conditions are naturally apt for institutions of strong oligarchy. For the preservation of those inhabitants derives from a force of this sort. And horse rearing is done by those possessing large properties, right? The ranches. Now, you have your horses, ranches, these are going to be large properties, ranching and that stuff. Where it is suitable for heavily arms, the next sort of oligarchy. For the light, for heavily armed element is made up of well-off more than the poor, right? The lightly armed and naval forces are, on the other hand, are wholly popular. So therefore, this looks at the arms of war, the different questions of war. If it's cavalry, well, to be able to do this, you need to have big ranches. And if they're the cavalry's in charge and they're very wealthy, they're going to have the cavalry in that sense. Heavily armed, well, again, this is going to be skilled, and the cost of money to maintain your arms is going to be hands of a few, right? Fewer. So therefore, this is the most oligarchy. This will be the next oligarchy. And the other two are popular, the light armed and the naval arms, right? At present, at present, therefore, wherever this sort of multitude is numerous, and there's a factional split, the oligarchs often get the worst of the contest. So, if you have this situation, right, and if there is a factional split, the larger support popularly armed and naval force will get the worst of the contest. The remedy for this should be sought from those generals who are expert in war. So, okay, who join who join to the cavalry and the heavily armed force and appropriate light armed force. So mixing, blending. Right? This is the way the people prevail against the well-off in factional splits. Being lightly armed, they can easily contend against a force of cavalry and heavily armed troops. To establish such a force from these, therefore, is to establish one against themselves. Rather, there being a distinction of age, the older on the one side and the younger on the other, they should teach their sons the working of auxiliaries and light arms when still young, and some should be picked out from the boys to be themselves practitioners of those tasks. Again, this is particularly those tasks of skilled mercenary commanders. Light armed Pistoloid troops had become increasingly military significant by the 4th century. Most commonly are armaments consist of a javelin and a small shield, but specialized forces of archers and slingers also exist in certain areas. Aristotle appeals to counsel training in such specialties, which may be auxiliary cupola arms referred to here, for, for all of the oligarchic youth, and establish a select force drawn from the oligarchs themselves. So again, this is a way to preserve it, making them better armed, right? Given a share in the governing body to a multitude, giving, in other words, the plutuma, right? Giving a share in the plutuma to the multitude can occur either in the way spoken of earlier, in other words, to those possessing the assessments, or as among the Thebans, to those abstaining from a certain period of time of the worker's tasks, right? Or at Messalea, where they make a judgment as to whom merits office, where whether those within the governing body or those without it. Now, again, 23. This is a very interesting thing for Thebes chapter. Look at book 3, chapter 5, paragraphs. Nothing else is known of the Messalian agreement. But again, look at this. The Messalian agreement is very interesting because what is he saying here? Well, either you should. But let's go look at this. Let's go back for a second. It says sharing. Those who are going to be, if you're going to do this, sharing government body. What one way is that okay. In other words, the wealth of the property gets better. Everyone gets wealthier. So all of a sudden, the many all of a sudden become the assessment. That's one way. Or another way to do this is the Theban way, which was that um, those of the other laboring classes don't do labor. They give up labor. They've not been engaging in labor and application of that, and therefore they're picked to that office. Or the Melesidians, where they make a judgment based on whose merit, whether those within the governing body or those outside of it. Therefore, those the class who belong to it, or maybe we pick people who, particularly of those who are merit, who are not part of those who become part of the governing body. We pick them because of their merit to become part of it. We include those people in it. So that's another mechanism of how this can happen. The way that the oligarchy can preserve itself and expand its platoon, the governing, the ruling offices. Further, respect to the most authoritative offices, which should be retained by those in the regime. Public service should be attached to them, so that people may be willing to forego taking part in them and may feel indulgence for their rulers as having paid a heavy price for the office. In other words, if you're going to have to be these members of these ruling off more authoritative, demand a lot from them, that they have to do more, they have to sacrifice more. Why? Because this way the people look at they look at the cost, what all those things they have to do that, not worth it. Okay, my God, I have to sacrifice that. I can't do that. Can't do that. In other words, you put attach public services to them, things they have to do. It is also appropriate for them both to offer magnificent sacrifices when they enter office and to institute something common, so that the people, in sharing in what is connected with these festivities and seeing the city adorned with votive structures and buildings, are glad to see the regime endure. we'll stop here for paragraph 24. Again, apparently to erect public building and a monument, right? Um, so they're happy with this. They'll see that you build these things, that do these things. They built these common things that the city that everyone will benefit from. That they're willing to. They're glad to see this regime room, and it will also result that the notables have a memorial of their expenditures. In other words, they're remembered for this. They're honored for this, right? At present, however, those connected with oligarchies do not do this, but rather the opposite. They are in search of spoils, no less than honor. In other words, dangerous oligarchy is that all of a sudden they want more profit, more wealth, aggrandizing their power and aggrandizing their wealth, and at the expense of the people. And that's going to cause resentment. Hence, it is well to speak of them as small democracies. That's a weird line, 25, right? In other words, oligarchs lower themselves to the level of the people in the pursuit of profit. In other words, this is interesting. The idea in other words, everyone wants a profit. Profit is a vulgar emotion. The desire to profit, the desire to always profit, this is something vulgar. So when the oligarchs reduce themselves, this is why they call this is the irony here. There's a kind of Aristotle's kind of making a joke, saying that they speak of these oligarchies who, instead of trying to do great things and trying to do things, always seeking profits, getting more money, getting greedy, always getting more money. Um, they're acting vulgar. They're acting like the people. The people, as long as they can profit, they don't mind. And the reason why they will turn earlier, but if you require all these great sacrifices, then they'll say, okay, the cost is too high. Okay, the cost of it is too high. But if and this is what's dangerous about modern oligarchies, is they don't require the great to suffer. If they, and actually, you can say even this. This is one of the old things of the old elite, the old wealth of America, even the golden age, right? In the golden age, they often sacrificed. They also did all these things publicly for sacrifice. They would they would do aggrandizement. They like like all the great wealth producers and the so-called robber barons. They built not only built things, but they produced a lot of public services. I forget the name of the guy who did libraries. That they a lot of their Carnegie gave every city, a town, a library, small little libraries. Mellons, all these wealthy people often produce big events and charities of things to accomplish things and public services. Um, and their children serve. They demanded that they serve as children do things and achieve things and participate in society and run for civic offices. And whereas this something happened in the turn of the 20th century, the later post World War II environment, the wealthy didn't want to participate. Look at the wealthy starts objecting to even go. And actually, the middle class, the upper middle class, didn't go to Vietnam. It was the lower middle class and the poor went to Vietnam. It was kind of, some people argue that Vietnam War in America was kind of the first class war, beginning of the conflict of this and the breakdown of the regime. And that's the wealthy did not no longer the wealthier and the upper the rich and the powerful did not think they had to sacrifice anymore. And this leads to resentment. This is the danger, he says here. This is why this is the unstable part of an oligarchy. You need to have them. If they're going to preserve an oligarchy and establish it, you got to make sure that that the oligarch is able to last. And the danger of this is when by not doing these things, you're going to not last. And this is how now it continues at this point, right? That's why he talks about us being the vulgarity of the oligarch who only cares about money making and profit, and it will aggrandize more and more profit making for themselves at the expense of others. This leads to conflict. Now he raised this earlier in other chapters. We talked about this, and particularly in the chapters on oligarchy, but what destroys oligarchies in book 5, chapter chapter 6. Right. This is he warned about this. Right. The excessive oligarchies trying to make more and more profit at the expense of everyone else. This will destroy This will destroy the oligarchies. Now, he's mocking them by calling them Democrats, right? Now, this is the next paragraph ends the chapter uh, as as to how one ought to establish democracies and oligarchies. Then let this discussion stand in this manner. So he ends our discussion here on establishing oligarchy. Now, again, this is interesting. The we've had like 5 chapters on democracy, right? 5 almost chapters dealing with this, maybe the 4 chapters, but 1 chapter introducing the question, introduces democracy. And, we had 4 chapters, chapter 5 being the finishing of it. Chapters 6 and 7 dealing with oligarchies, right? In other words, notice this. He spends more time talking about how to establish democracies than he does about oligarchies. Okay. But then he says that oligarchies, the thing about oligarchies is it's simpler, in other words, it's simpler to preserve democracy by their size. But then he talks about, this would assuming he would need to discuss more about oligarchy. If what he says about oligarchy is true, that oligarchy is ultimately demised by its failure to blend and not mixing things well, not taking care about the institutions properly. In other words, um, this is a very interesting thing. Then why isn't more discussion talked about the things necessary for instituting them? He seems to be giving us more about democracy, but then maybe this chapter was also about the arms, right? The question of arms, which is that's actually very interesting. He does not give us a discussion of the notable. Notice this, he doesn't give a discussion of the different types of notables. He gives a discussion of the different type of multitudes and the different elements of the armed elements in this chapter, but not a discussion of the different multitudes. Something he has discussed earlier in 4. So he's silenced about this. What about the multitudes? Sorry, notables. What about the multitudes? Not multitudes. Sorry, the notables. About their character, where the different types of democracy seems to different varieties of democracy echoes to the type of population there is, and we have 4 types, and therefore the 4 types of democracies. Um, the suggestion here is that the 4 types of military arms is tied to that, but invertedly, and that's even more interesting. In other words, if this is connected to this, and in other words, that the best to the worst gives us the things of that. Does the 4 types of other arms give us the best to the worst? Rather it echoes the different types of. In fact, it very much echoes the different types of arms seems to echo the 4 types of democracy, right? The last 2 are the most democratic, he says, of the arms, right? And the first 2 are more oligarchic, right? So therefore, it kind of evenly defines on this. The more oligarchy, more democratic. Um, well, isn't that then therefore inversed, right? And therefore, the most would be the extreme, but therefore it goes from the opposite. So that's weird in that sense. That discussion here and there, and this is why this chapter is kind of there's something about oligarchies. Why, if and actually this is something interesting. We don't notice. Okay, we stop here. Notice what isn't talked about instituting. He doesn't talk about instituting aristocracies. We'll get that. We'll institute aristocracy next chapter. We don't discuss kingship anymore, monarchy, or tyranny, right? Monarchies, either kingship or tyranny, is no longer discussed about instituting. We're not, and the middle mixed regime isn't mentioned. Now, this is why some people are mixed regime is also book 7. So the so-called aristocracy, the regime that's clearly the book 7 and 8 will be focusing on the regime that we would pray for. So this is the best regime. This is the regime that is the best, aristocratic, right? That is the aristocratic regime. So therefore, we'll get a discussion of that. That's why the structure of reading this way. We have, but notice he focuses on democracy, a larger discount on democracy, very little on oligarchy. The question is maybe oligarchy, and remember he says oligarchy is the more problematic always. So does is the lack of this is the lack of discussion of doing this is because that the oligarchic principle is more dangerous, and therefore if you try to establish it you are more likely this is but at the same time he says that's done through well a balance, right? Therefore you'd assume that he would want to talk about this, but he doesn't talk about it, therefore just assumes that. But he talks about democracy. He'll spend more time talking about how do you best establish democracy. So is this a democratic bias? Do we have a in book 6 a democratic bias here of Aristotle revealing a very democratic bias here, that he spends more time explaining that how you democracies are preserved and very almost nothing on oligarchies, even while saying that well, oligarchies require more skill and more effort, but then he doesn't spend any time doing it. So that's a very interesting thing. So we'll end our things here with ending his discussion. And we'll look at next time in chapter 8, which ends up the last chapter of book 6, which some people argue that it's incomplete. Book 6 should have maybe had more here. That's not like why don't we have a discussion of regime, mixed regime at all? Of here, why don't we have an institutional discussion of establishing a mixed regime? We don't have that at all. Instead, we get a kind of revised account of offices, right? A revision on the account of offices. But that's our next chapter. We'll do that tomorrow. Here, or the next time we meet, there. What we do here is end. So therefore, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, or some things you want to clarifications, or some points you want to do, please put them below, and when I see them, I will respond to you or expand on it. Please, if you have questions. If you liked it, like it. Please like it. Pass it on. Pass it on to others. Get your friends. Share it on social media. Please spread it out. If you're not subscribed, subscribe to make sure you get updates and notifications. Encourage others. I like the channel to grow. We like the channel growing a little bit. It has been growing a little bit like this. If you didn't like, okay, if you didn't like it, you have a problem with it, okay, say so. Thumb down, but then say in the comments what's wrong and what you would like fixed, or what something I didn't cover and that you wanted covered. Um, you can follow me on social media below. The links are there. What else? You want to help? You can, if people want to help financially, some mechanisms you can do those through Subscribe Star, and Patreon is listed. Of course, I have not. I've done this too late, and I should have done it earlier. People would be there. I'm a late comer. I should have been here this a while ago. But another way you can want to help, I can use the money on. It's like, please. Another way you can help is if you're not bought the book, buy this. This is the notebook on Aristotle's politics. This is kind of like a Cliff's Notes on the politics, not interpretation, not a commentary. Those are my other books, and the book I'm working on now. This is a kind of a study guide, something that helps you try to work with. Are you reading the politics or studying the politics? You want to get a good grasp. It offers charts. It offers outlines. It offers thematic themes, what are addressed in certain things, book by book, chapter by chapter, that help you get a better understanding of the text. Okay, that guide you through the text with some things on some of the secondary literature and other things like that. You can get it if you buy it through Lulu, the publisher. I will get it. It's available on Amazon, other places, but if you go through there, they make a profit, right? So if we buy by Lulu directly, I get the little profit. So this is, if you know a student, many of you who are good people have been here already, or who have already helped already. If you know someone, encourage people to go watch this, watch the whole series. But this is why you can help with this by going on. Help me continually doing these things. So please do it. Now, with that, I'll stop. I hope you have all a good day. Take care. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.